Barbara Slavin is a director of the Future of Iran Initiative and a foreign policy expert here in Washington. Barbara, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
What do you make of what the Europeans are trying to do in Brussels? I mean, Jeremy Hunt seemed optimistic they can somehow salvage this deal. But if you talk to the Iranians, they're going to tell you there's been a lot of talk, very little action. Of course, they've reduced their obligations under the JCPOA. What do they need to do, the Europeans, to show concrete steps about what they're doing to salvage this deal?
I thought the most interesting comment that was coming out of Brussels was a reference to European companies perhaps pre-buying Iranian oil. We actually had a blog post on the Atlantic Council website, our Iran source blog, about this idea whereby European countries would purchase Iranian oil for the future when sanctions will not be still in place. So this way they don't violate U.S. sanctions by buying the oil now, but Iran gets credit, which gets put into an account that Iran can tap to buy, for example, food and medicine from European companies. I think it's a really ingenious idea, and it's one of the ways in which Iran might be persuaded to kind of slow walk these breaches of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action.
Well, the Europeans also have said they want dialogue. They want the United States and Iran to sit back at the negotiating table and talk. But do you envision a scenario where Iran would say, okay, we're going to come back to the negotiating table while they are facing these crippling economic sanctions? Is that even going to happen as long as Iran is under sanctions?
Yeah, I think it's doubtful, at least for the next year or so. Obviously, Iran has an eye on our domestic politics in the United States. If Trump is reelected, they may have no other choice but to return to talks. But for now, I think what they're really trying to do is put pressure on Europe, pressure on China, pressure on Russia and others to provide some sort of compensation for the sanctions that will allow Iran's economy to kind of hobble along, at least for another year.
Iran has exceeded the limit on its uranium enrichment. They've been very transparent about it. But did Iran really have to do that?
Well, I think in a way they did. I mean, for a year they did nothing, right? They gave Europe in particular a whole year to come up with a trading mechanism, but, you know, nothing passed through that mechanism. We understand now that some transactions have actually taken place. And so this is a way to sort of keep the pressure on. It's very minor, as was said. It's very reversible. There's still a long way from the ability to actually make a nuclear weapon. But it's a signal to the international community that it's not cost-free. These sanctions are not cost-free.
Let's talk about the attacks on these 6 oil tankers in the Persian Gulf. U.S. has pointed the finger at Iran, and then U.K. said Iran tried to block one of its tankers last week. U.S. is now working on building some kind of coalition to protect the waters of Persian Gulf. Is that a risky move, Barbara?
Well, it's always risky because this is a very narrow waterway. Accidents can happen. But it's also an old game that Iran has been playing with the U.S. for 40 years. I mean, going back to the 1980s, the U.S. decided to put American flags on oil tankers going down the Persian Gulf, and sometimes Iran would menace and sometimes not. There were actual clashes at that time. I think now, again, this is messaging, this is signaling. As long as no lives are lost, we are still hopefully not in a situation where there's going to be a direct confrontation between the U.S. and Iran.
We'll leave it there. Barbara Slavin, thank you so much.
You're welcome.